and bring the power of your mind and the power of your understanding, the power of your knowledge as an offering to a suffering world.
Robert Moore exposes a global epidemic of grandiosity, unchecked narcissism and violence tearing us apart. From a shattering moment in Mumbai to a worldwide crisis, this is a raw look at how rising anxiety breaks down our personal and cultural systems. The old spiritual containers are collapsing, fueling chaos, addiction and aggression. But there's a way forward, building inner strength and compassionate fellowship to weather the flood. Stay with us to uncover the truth behind the chaos and the path to resilience. This lecture is titled The Flood, Facing the Growing Epidemic of Grandiosity, Part 1 of the conference, Coping with Grandiosity in Our Lives, the Deity and the Dragon Inside Us, recorded in 2014 in San Antonio, Texas.
In late 2011, Ron had invited me here to offer lectures and a seminar. Unfortunately, at that time, a serious illness interrupted our plans and I was unable to come. I had planned to speak on two related topics in depth that related to what we're going to be talking about these 3 evenings. The first thing I was going to lecture on then was the fellowship of the dragon, the shift from hope to realization in psyche, spirit, and community. And the other topic was going to be the apocalypse of love, the shift from hopeful longing to embodied joy and selfhood, spiritual practice, and community. I will be playing some of those tunes tonight and these 2 following evenings. But I will be saving our celebration of all the rich, abundant life until the 3rd lecture, because to move there too quickly would be to really be superficial and engaging what is really going on in our time. When I have taught all these many years, I have spent 40 years, as Ron said, teaching comparative philosophy, comparative religions, comparative psychotherapies. And when I have taught those seminars, I actually had about 3 hours to lecture on those. So forgive me if I start getting long-winded tonight. But I always started with offering a diagnostics. What is the problem? And then I would always try to come up with an understanding of the dynamics of the problem. And then I would end with how the particular theory or point of view understood the answers to the problem or what can be done about the problem. So that's actually built into these 3 lectures. Tonight, we're going to be looking at diagnosis of our situation now. And tomorrow night, we will be working on understanding the dynamics of what is going on, the psychodynamics, the spiritual dynamics of what is going on, so that we can get a sense of just how it works. And then Wednesday night, we will be talking about what is really possible in our time. What is possible for persons of faith in our time. And I would just say to you in advance that I want you to understand that the central point of all these lectures is going to be remembering the words of that radiant one who said, "Be not anxious." So I need to say that to you because if you look at all the things going on now, and I didn't say that to you, you might have some of these things that I'm going to talk about tonight push you into despair. And I'm not in despair. We are not going there. And yet there's some strong things that tempt us these days to go into despair. As you may or may not know, I have been attempting in the last 50 years to carry forward Carl Jung's work into mapping and understanding the structures of the collective unconscious. Now, that catalog that Ron was mentioning and that Rose was mentioning has got a lot of the resources that are available through my website on it. But for tomorrow night, I would just like to ask all of you to spend some time just looking carefully at those diagrams in there, because those diagrams are a distillation of what I have come to understand about psychology and spirituality. And so tomorrow night, I'll be taking us through that quickly and not too much in depth. I'm hoping one of these days Ron will ask me to come back and we can have more time to unpack all that. So tomorrow night, I'm going to lift up those elements, those psychological elements that will help us understand why creating an inner arc of the covenant, a psycho-spiritual inner arc of the covenant, is essential for standing against the moral, psychological, and social chaos that we are seeing today. Everything that I'm going to say to you in all of these nights will be drawing upon the paradigm, the integrated paradigm that's available and summarized in that catalog. The real overall title for these 3 evenings would be best expressed as the psychological and spiritual essentials as I have come to understand them. I want to start with a personal story of an experience that started me on this journey that's brought me here tonight. It's a story that's set in India in August of 1987. It was the time just before the global New Age celebration of the so-called harmonic convergence. As you may know or may not know, the harmonic convergence was a name given to the world's first globally synchronized meditation, which occurred on August 16th and 17th, 1987, which, according to the people like Jose Argeles and others, was reflecting the significant prophecies in the Mayan calendar. And it was related to some European and Asian astrological traditions. This event, and I knew none of this at the time, this event had been predicted by author Tony Scherer in the book The Lord of the Dawn. According to Argeles' interpretation of Mayan cosmology, I later found out, that date, August 1987, marked the end of 22 cycles of 52 years each, or 1,144 years in all. According to these people, those 22 cycles were divided into 13 heaven cycles, so-called heaven cycles, which began in AD 843 and ended in 1519, when the 9 hell cycles began. According to these prophecies and Jose Argeles, these hell cycles were to come to an end 468 years later in 1987. The very beginning of the days of the 9 hell cycles was precisely the day that Cortez landed in Mexico, April 22nd, 1519. According to their interpretations, the 9 hell cycles of 52 years each ended precisely on August 16th and 17th, 1987. At the time, I had no knowledge of these apocalyptic prophecies at all. I was a 45-year-old, self-satisfied, tenured, full professor. And those of you that know academics, you know what that's like. But I was a full professor, and I had a successful psychoanalytic practice. And I had, in my view, achieved all the goals that I had set myself as a 23-year-old graduate student in psychology and religion at Southern Methodist University. My wife Margaret and I decided we could afford to take some time off and go bumming around Asia. And so we did. And we were having a good time, but as time passed, we witnessed an increasing number of really troubling sights as we traveled through various places in Asia: Borneo, the Philippines, Taiwan, and now India. In the then Bombay, what is now called Mumbai, Margaret and I were in a taxi, and we were being driven around, being shown the sights by this taxi driver. And he pulls into this one street, and he proudly turns around and says to us, "You can have any of these people that you want, and you can do whatever you want to with them." And I thought I had misheard what he said. And I said, "Excuse me?" And then he repeated it. As we looked, there were thousands of men, women, and children standing on this street, hoping to be purchased. And apparently no one had told either these slave traders or these little vulnerable ones who were living in the hell of sexual slavery and violence. Apparently no one had told them that the 9 hells were supposed to have come to an end that day. For a moment, it was as if someone had stuck a hot poker into my forehead. I entered what we might euphemistically call an altered state of consciousness. For many years, I'd been privileged as a professor to teach advanced seminars in the dynamics of the sacred and the dynamics of evil. And I'd given many lecture series on that topic, some of which you can see are still available on my website. But suddenly, the topic of the dynamics of evil was not academic to me anymore. It dawned on me then that the same reality I was witnessing had long been present in my Chicago and all cities in the world. I realized at that moment that I had never been awake enough to allow a conscious, existential, close encounter with the actual power of radical evil. I realized I had not been able to allow reality to penetrate what my Freudian friends have always talked about as my ego's defense mechanisms against the truth, my comfortable denial. At that time, I was experiencing a searing realization of the presence, reality, and power of aggressive, shameless evil. As a man, I was especially struck by the extent to which the engine of this horrific reality was clearly male narcissism and grandiosity. I realized that what we would call today uninitiated men, what I've called monster boys in adult bodies, were perpetrating and shamelessly propagating the largest proportion of the flood of hell energies abroad in this world. I had never intended to become a specialist in masculine psychology, but inadvertently I had stumbled upon the structural psychological reality that gives us a scientific account of the unbridled aggression and violent acting out by men, and especially men under the age of 45. So at that time I decided that I should not wait to publish my larger integrated structural psychoanalytic theory until later, because it was clear to me that I needed to articulate and make available a comprehensive moral psychology of masculinity in a series of 5 volumes on the key archetypes of the male self. Sadly, to my chagrin, as we look at this today, if we look at it without our rose-colored glasses, we have to realize that the situation has gotten horrifically worse in the 27 years since that eye-opening experience of mine. We need to face, I think, the degraded and deteriorating state of world spirituality and how we are seeing a pan-tribal, I would call it, a pan-tribal regression in the world, in which our systems, our personality systems, are experiencing more anxiety than ever before. There's a lot of scientific evidence that indicates that anxiety from the infant in the womb to all of us sitting here tonight, that the intensity and power of anxiety has gotten worse, especially in the last decade. I don't know whether you've had, as I have, the privilege of studying family systems theory and the larger theory of the great Murray Bowen. But in that wonderful tradition, and if you haven't looked at that or applied it to your own life and your own family, then I encourage you to do so. But there's this fundamental axiom that these integrative thinkers of Bowen theory have set before us. And that is that the main thing that assails persons, families, and even organizations is unregulated anxiety. So we need to understand that behind the things that are going on now is not just, it is an epidemic of grandiose acting out, but it also is manifest in an epidemic, a horrific anxiety epidemic. What do we know now from psychology and systems theory? I do a lot of work. I consider myself a systems theorist, trying to understand the way in which our personality system, our family system, our social systems, our organizational systems all interlock in a sort of a multidimensional systemic function. What we now know is that as the anxiety in any system, whether it's your personality system, what I call your system self, or in your family system, your marital system, your organizational systems, as the anxiety begins to go up, simultaneously, your capacity to regulate goes down. And what happens is a comprehensive deterioration, what we psychoanalysts would call regression. Now, what happens with that? Three things happen when you start being more anxious, or when I start being more anxious. And I've spent a lot of years frying in my own neurotic anxiety. Pray for me, I'm getting slowly better. But here's the important thing for us to be aware of tonight. You know, we're seeing all this incredible escalation in violence escalation and sadistic abuse. We're seeing people act as if they've lost their minds, that they are out of touch with truth. We have noticed that when our anxiety gets higher, when we speak to our people we're trying to communicate with, they don't seem to be able to hear. Well, it turns out that actually is a function of our neurophysiology. When we are in a situation where our radar, and you have fabulous radar, you have radar that you don't even have a clue that you've got, but it evolved with our species. We have this incredible radar, and we scan automatically, not consciously, we scan automatically for the presence of any anxious energies. There's this thing in the brain that's called the amygdala. How many of you have heard of that? Okay, good. Because that amygdala is in the old brain. It is ancient. It is the part of the ancient brain. Some call it reptilian brain. And when you notice what I often say to people, try to be more conscious of when you put on your war face with your husband or your wife. Because the moment that amygdala in your old brain sees in the face scan any anxiety, it immediately goes, your brain and your body immediately move to high alert. And guess what? The circuits in your brain that actually enable you to listen, they shut down. They shut down. The old brain has decided it's not time to have a conversation. Not only does it shut down the capacity to listen, automatically it shuts down your forebrain. So the circuits in your frontal lobes that you need to be halfway intelligent shut down. So if you've ever thought that your husband just doesn't get it when you try to communicate, well, you're right. I tell you what, in the face of an assertive woman who might possibly be angry, men regress very quickly into their little boy. As my friend John Lee, who some of you may know, wrote in his little book that I recommend to you called Growing Yourself Back Up, in which he addresses the tendency we have in our marriages to become 3 years old at the first sign of anxiety on the other's face. So we really can't think. And the third thing is, automatically when we detect anxiety in the face of the other, whether it's a child, a spouse, a friend, an employer or employee, your complex adaptive system, which is what I scientifically call your personality system, it immediately moves to more primitive, archaic aggression. It's totally automatic. You don't choose to act it out. I want you to think about that a minute. Now, if I'm right, and the researchers are right, that the anxiety all around us in this world has grown more and more intense, then it should not surprise us that we have a hard time understanding what's going on, and that communication seems to be shut down, and that there is so much flagrant, archaic, primitive aggression being acted out. One of the things that even in our time, even with all the progress that's been made in terms of trying to become more aware of the need to treat women with respect and empathy and tenderness and coming out of the heart, the recently published research shows that domestic violence and abuse of women is higher than it ever has been. And we need to just understand, we need to understand the dynamics of how this is working. And so I don't know if you've gotten any more anxious lately. Maybe you've gotten to where you don't listen to the news, which might be not a bad idea. But if you just kind of look around, there are lots of things going on right now that if you are aware of them, they automatically put you into anxiety states. Tomorrow night I'm going to be talking about the way in which the various capacities for containing dragon energies in the psyche, it's what I call all this hot regressive energy, hot archetypal energy, unregulated archetypal energy. We need to understand that these vessels, these spiritual and cultural and ritual vessels that used to be a bulwark between human beings and this horrific energy have been deteriorating. I want you to take a minute and think about what you have noticed about the way in which the churches seem to be not being able to do for people what they were able to do not so very long ago. I had another memory about Texas that relates to this. When I was 23, I was privileged to be a psychotherapy intern in the big mental hospital, Terrell State Mental Hospital. And in those days, I looked around at the conditions for the patients and so forth in that big, huge state mental hospital, and I thought, well, gee, this is not a very good environment for these people. But there were some good things about it. I was doing, under the supervision of a Dr. Fisher, I was doing group psychotherapy on a maximum security ward there. And I've been thinking about all this and doing my life review, an aging man. And I wanted to call to memory George Wyatt, who was in that maximum security ward. He was this mountain of a man, about 6'7" or 6'8", 250 pounds. George was a heavyweight professional boxer in Texas. And most of the time he did great. He was a great fighter. But once in a while, he would have a little too much wild turkey or Jim Beam. and he would get rolling. And when he got really rolling, it was really hard to contain him. And I'm told that that right before I got to meet him, it had taken 12 Texas Rangers to subdue him so that they could get him some meds and so on. Well, so I had this privilege. I didn't really realize how much a privilege it was at the time, but I had this privilege of witnessing this fine man, this Dr. Fisher, who could have been doing private practice in some very wealthy suburb. But he was there deploying himself for these prisoners. Fast forward. We look at our world now, those people who were having some containment and some care in Texas in 1965. They're on the streets now. They're homeless. And in Chicago, these folk try to get arrested so they can go to prison and eat, have a place to eat and sleep. I want you to just kind of get a sense of that contrast. So I'm running out of time here. I will come back tomorrow night and I'll be talking about how this has changed and why it has changed. And I'll be talking about more and more detail about the collapse of the vessel, the cultural and religious vessels that used to contain a lot of this horrific, regressive, archaic energy. In any case, when I say I want us to face the dragon, we need to face the psychodynamic and the spiritual realities that are creating the real flood. The real flood. And we need to understand that the collapse of the vessels, whether it's the difficulties of the Roman Church or the Protestant churches or whatever spiritual group, we need to understand that collapse is serving as the fundamental engines that are fueling this global compulsivity and chaos. Personal, social, political, and cultural chaos. And now, after all these years, it's quite clear to me that it's not just males that are grandiose. Sadly, now I understand that grandiosity, unbridled, unregulated grandiosity, is an equal opportunity scourge that aggressively seeks at all times to infect both all persons and all tribes, as it was in the time of Noah, and countless times and places since then. This is the real flood. This is the ugly, as someone put it, inconvenient truth of our world at this time. It is this key fact that makes it urgent that we all work together and collaborate, cooperate in building a new spiritual ark, an inner temple, and an outer fellowship that can enable us to stand strongly and calmly against this evil tide in our world now. So tomorrow night, I'm going to speak on the structure and dynamics of dragon energy and the essentials of what we need to know to contain and channel it creatively and effectively in our time. So that's what I wanted to say to you tonight. And at this time, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Rose is going to get us to reconvene promptly in 10 minutes, and we're going to take questions and dialogue until Rose pulls me off of this stage. I want us just all call to our mind the radiant reality of the one who said, "Be not anxious." So we have, okay, just raise your hand and our people with the mics will bring you a mic. Stand, say your name, ask the question, and I'll try to offer a reflection if I have anything that I know about it.
Okay, sir. My question is concerning the growing epidemic of alcoholism and drug addiction. Now, I suppose with what you were saying, it's a reaction to anxiety, but is it just that?
Well,
I don't know, but
everything is. He's asking, is the rise in alcoholism and other addictions, every kind of addiction, they're all getting more intense and frequent and widespread. And of course, all you know that there isn't any one-dimensional answer to any of those questions. That there is no single cause. It's a integrated, synchronistic system, multidimensional set of causes. It's always amazing to me how when chaos constellates, it just seems to come from all directions, not just one. But I think you're really on track, because if anxiety is rising, as there's enormous evidence that it is, from the womb, everywhere, then I like to think about capacities for system regulation. Everybody has the potential to regulate dragon energy or archetypal energy or the id, as Freud would say. Everybody has the potential to do that. But there's a big difference between potential and actual capacity. So tomorrow night I'll be talking about what makes it so hard to regulate. Let's just talk about your ability to regulate our anxiety and my ability to regulate my anxiety. And I'm not a poster boy for the best way to do that. But anyway, you're absolutely right. See, alcohol, Carl Jung was the man that had the insights that led to Alcoholics Anonymous. The idea of Alcoholics Anonymous came from one of the early founders of AA visiting with Jung to try to get help. And Jung clearly knew that when you're turning to spirits to help you calm down, that's a substitute for the capital S spirit. And so, as we will be talking about more further, we turn to all sorts of things to try to calm down. But I was thinking some other country songs as I was preparing to come down here. And you remember that, looking for love in all the wrong places? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. we're really looking for love. We're all the time looking for love. We're all the time looking for the love that is strong and capable of holding us to our real self. But the tragic truth is, so many as children in their family of origin, for whatever reason, the parents were unable to mediate that kind of indestructible love. So we're always looking for the big love and the big peace and the big wisdom. But we're struggling. So you're really right. Someone else. Yes, sir.
I was on a study in Louvain, and I went to Germany and to Dachau. So I had a similar experience of evil.
Oh.
And in my study, part of my doctoral work was on penance, the sacrament,
Right.
the history of it, and so on. And you had to look into the problem of evil, and Richard Gula, who is one of our top sacramental theologians out in California, and he wrote in his book on faith and morality a section on evil that I could really relate to in going to Dachau. And he talked about systemic evil.
Systemic evil.
And that whole camp situation was a good example of unbridled evil.
Right.
Like I have never experienced in my life.
Right.
But as you're talking tonight, I get a sense that it's much worse, much more comprehensive, much more of a danger to our entire society.
Yes, absolutely.
That's something that came and went,
Right.
but was just a contributor to what you're talking about
Right. Thank you.
as something greater. You want to comment on that?
Yes, sir. I'm happy to. You know, our defenses try to clean up, paint up, and fix up our ability to live, do what Jung talked about. He had this idea called the regressive restoration of the persona. Now, that's fancy $500 words to talk about the way that once we get a glimpse of the reality, our defenses close up. And therefore, it's extremely difficult. If you don't have tremendous inner strength, it's very difficult to allow yourself to perceive the various holocausts that are going on now. So, yes, you're right, and I do think that you know, all of you I know a lot about the discernment of the Spirit. I know you've studied that for years and years. Well, the same Spirit that was in Dachau is alive and well and abroad all over the world now. See? It's not a different spirit. It may have gotten more creative and more effective since then. But you're absolutely right, Father. Someone else? Yes. Okay.
And you talked about the evil in India. And we were talking outside a bit ago about how do we solve this problem? And I guess you touched on that just a little bit ago. What keeps the human psyche from addressing those issues? How do we break down those defensive mechanisms so we get out of our comfort zone and plug in?
Wonderful question.
Well, you talked about India. I saw a headline in the paper today. It said the undocumented minor children from Central and South America are chasing the American dream. Well, they're escaping evil. That's what they're doing. They're surviving. They're human. They're being trafficked as sex slaves. They're being recruited by gangs.
They're the little ones that have no advocates.
Yes.
Right. Thank you for that, Robert. Well, that's the question, isn't it? Did you all hear his question? How do we deal with this? Can we get better at punching through our denial? Yeah, it's possible. We have that potential. But here's this little problem we'll be talking about tomorrow night and Wednesday. If you punch through your denial before you have developed an inner vessel and an inner powerful ally, what I would call the great self within that you relate to consciously. If you look at the truth of what's happening without having a psycho-spiritual temple here, you'll get psychotic. Psychosis is a lot closer to all of us all the time than most therapists know. Because psychosis is a failure of regulation of archetypal energy. So we just need to know, here's the deal. Thank God for your defense mechanisms. Because if you didn't have your defense mechanisms, if there wasn't somebody in there, in your ego, I'm using it in the Freudian way now, in your ego mechanism, if there wasn't somebody in there monitoring how much truth you can take without frying, we'd have a lot more psychosis. And so here's the key where we're going. Tomorrow night I'm going to lay out more about the actual dynamics of what you're talking about. And then Wednesday night I'm going to talk about what I believe to be a realistic possibility for you to get an inner temple that really functions, really installed, so like Jesus of Nazareth, you can look at the truth without getting psychotic. Does that compute? So we're going there because the truth is, I believe I think what we need to set our sights on is realizing our potential for high levels of spiritual realization. But notice I said potential. It's one thing to have potential for high level, what the Buddhists or the Hindus would call enlightenment. In my view, everybody that is not, and maybe even those who are brain damaged, have the potential to have a lot more living awareness. But the deal is, one has to actually build the capacity, just like building that inner pyramid, Mayan pyramid, or building what I call building the inner temple. Now, I'll be telling you what I call that scientifically. I put my scientist hat on, my psychoanalytic scientist hat on, I call that achieving optimal cohesion in your complex adaptive system. That's what spiritual enlightenment is. And that's what forming an inner temple is. But I believe that all of you are likely making every effort to move to a higher spiritual integration. You wouldn't be here if you weren't interested in that. And the truth is, we know a lot. If you look at the resources in depth psychology, Jungian psychology, systems, Bowen systems theory, comparative spirituality, there are a lot of resources to move in that direction. But it's a construction project. So, yes.
I've been wondering why people get killed for their faith beliefs.
Yeah.
You know, why? What is it that makes people so anxious that they have to kill the Christian? I don't really have a good answer on that yet. But do you think the anxiousness might come because there's so much knowledge out there that when we find out that maybe we've been thinking the wrong, or we don't feel confident in our thoughts because, well, we're not the expert in that, or, I don't know, all of the knowledge that we're able to get now, is it not a comforting thing? It's more of a anxiety-giving thing.
One of the most important truths any teacher, healer, or psychotherapist has to learn if they're going to not push people into more chaos is that people have to be given knowledge at an optimal rate. Because the rule is that if more information comes into your system than your processors can process, your system integration will degrade. It always, if you're overstimulated by too much information, even if it's right, maybe even especially if it's right, it will regress you. And so if you're working with someone, we all are, all of you are working with somebody, try to be kind and have empathy for how much their system is already struggling to make sense of things. And so, St. Paul talked about, being careful about what form of food you give somebody, right? So we need to stretch, in my international men's organization that I support, the Mankind Project, they always talk about they need to have a stretch. A person needs to have a stretch if they want to transform. But you don't want to stretch till you break, right? So you're absolutely right. We have information overload now. Technical knowledge has outrun our spiritual capacities. And all the digitalization is making us less capable of regulating. As the increase of digitalization of everything goes on, the evidence is that it is degrading the quality of interpersonal relationships. And you know what the most important effective regulator for you is? It's a loving heart connection with someone or someones. And without that heart connection, if we just go with knowledge, it's going to make us crazier. And that's what's happening. See, how are we doing on time? Okay, back here.
My question is this. Do you think that we will be able, or anyone will ever be able to change a Muslim's attitude towards Christianity? That's it.
Don't you think it's interesting how some people are really good at pulling the pin out of the hand grenade and rolling it under the door? Thank you for that explosive question. I have a few comments to make about it, and we'll be talking about this as we go on these other nights. It's a great question, but we need to broaden that question. I've been trying to get my friends who really occupy very narrow geography on the left to have more empathy for all of the misguided attempts people have to find containment and ways to regulate their anxiety. The truth is, and we can talk more about this, the truth is that people turn to fundamentalism, whether it's Buddhist fundamentalism, which I didn't know existed, but it does, Hindu fundamentalism, which wasn't supposed to exist, but it does. So our idealization of these Asian traditions that are supposed to not, be tribal and hostile and aggressive towards you need to get over that. Because humans turn to rigid vessels after the anxiety gets up. And if you want to dwell in the love of Jesus, you need to have empathy for why people are so desperate that they turn to rigid ways to try to stay sane. Do you compute what I'm saying? So we have to love. We have to be compassionate. We have to dwell in the big compassion. And I know it's a challenge. It's a lot easier to demonize. It's a lot easier to make crazy acting out something that tribe does. But the truth is, as I said earlier, it's an equal opportunity scourge. All the tribes are subject to it. And all of us, in my Facing the Dragon book, which some of you may have seen, I talk about in there how one of the last refuges of infantile grandiosity that people can go to and still feel humble, really feel humble, is spiritual tribalism. Because I'm not grandiose. I'm just right. I want you to think about that tonight when you're home. Go home, have a drink, put your feet up, and think about that. So I know what you're talking about, and there is a thing, and you know I like to do an archetypal analysis of every religious tradition, using my decoding of archetypal configurations, and it's quite clear that some spiritual traditions are flooded with lover energy, and they couldn't find their warrior energy with both hands. And some spiritual traditions, not just Islamic, are so flooded with warrior energy, that's what makes them so sure they need to suppress, eliminate, have a spiritual ethnic cleansing. They're Christians and Buddhists and Hindus and Jews, and you know, it's popular way to function. But we'll be thinking about this a lot more. And, of course, any given personality, there are a lot of Islamic people who regulate very well and who seek to manifest a great deal of love. But we have to think about this. My wife, Margaret Shanahan, who's a Jungian analyst as well, she has a manuscript that I'd love for her to publish on the cultural unconscious. And in that manuscript, she examined the way in which our particular cultural location or our particular spiritual tribe influences how well we integrate. So that's another big topic we can talk about as we go. We probably need to get out of here. Is there one more question? Okay.
I know that everybody remembers the book by Viktor Frankl, you know, and Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning.
And my question is, we are still searching, I'm sure. And I wonder what you think of this thought, because it seems like you're saying it, that the meaning of life is to learn how to love.
You're in the right zip code.
Thanks.
I was blessed in Dallas, Texas, in 1965 to have the privilege of studying with Viktor Frankl. I had no idea. I was so way behind the ears at the time. I had no idea how fortunate I was. But he was a great man, and if you haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, he's witnessing to the importance of it. It's the truth. If, as he said, those who have a why to live, whether they're in the concentration camps or not, they can stand almost anyhow or anything. And so you see that repeatedly in the biblical witness. And we are meaning-seeking animals. And it's despair that freezes us in to giving up on our quest for a meaning to live by and live through. So you're absolutely right. I want to thank you for that, and you will have an opportunity to come back and go at that. But the will to meaning, that's what you're all about. The will to hold on to transcendent meaning. I want to thank all of you for your attention tonight and making this evening what it has been for you.
Thank you, Dr. Moore.
Thank you very much.